G'day guys, in this video series I'm going to be talking to you about the World Team Championships of Warhammer 40k from the perspective of the captain of and World Eaters player for Team Australia. We're going to dig into the preparation for the event, how that all went down and what our team strategy was. We're going to dig into the Warmasters singles event, we're going to talk about my list in detail, and we're also going to break down every round, every game that we played into every other opponent from nations all around the world. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the World Team Championships and Team Australia, this video series is for you. Let's get into it.
Look for the blood god.
Alrighty guys, welcome to this third installment of my WTC video series. Today we're going to be talking about the Warmasters. One of the beautiful things about the WTC is that it's more than just a teams event. It also contains one of the big singles event, one of the majors that has 500 odd players from all around the world participating in a singles 40k. And this is a really great way for a lot of players in the teams event to test out their list on the international stage, to sort of break the rust off and dust off their army and get into the motion of playing competitive 40k on this level. It's worth noting that not every player on every national team participates in the Warmasters, and many of them participate using different lists than what they would do in the teams event. The reason for this is you don't want to give away all of your tricks in the singles event and then have them known quantity in the teams event. That's one of the challenges with the singles event, and also a lot of people don't want to play the same list all week long. Playing 6 or so games from the Warmasters event and then another 7 games all with the same list can be a little bit boring and redundant, so people like to mix it up a little bit. And also, the Warmaster list submission is after the WTC list submission, so sometimes people will see the lists that are submitted for the World Team Championships and they'll want to bring something slightly different for the singles event. So there's a few elements going on there that contribute to how people play. Team Australia this year, we all just opted to play our team's list in the singles event. Our rationale behind that was it would give us an opportunity to gather more data. You'd be able to play your team's list into somebody else's list, and then you'd have an understanding of how your team's list is going to perform, and then we can use that information in the pairings process later on in the teams event. So I ran exactly my World Eaters list that I covered off in the last video for the Warmasters. So just a quick recap, it was Khan the Betrayer, 10 Khorne Berserkers in a Rhino, then we had another 5 Khorne Berserkers, 2 units of 3 8-bound, 3 units of 10 Jackals, I think I said a Rhino already, and then 3 units of Terminators. So that was essentially the list here, and that's what we went into for the Warmasters. So I've got my results up on the screen here. As you'll see, we've got a few big wins here. We've got a 20-point win, a 20-point win, a 4-point loss, and then a 12-point win. And then I dropped from the event. Now, before we get stuck into those matchups, let's talk about the nature of dropping in the event. So normally it's considered, not optimal to drop from Warhammer 40k events, right? It's disrespectful to the TOs, it's disrespectful for your opponents, and it's just weak and unnecessary. If you've paid money to attend a tournament, you might as well go all the way through regardless of your performance. However, for the Warmasters, because it's a warm-up event before the WTC, which is what a lot of people are there to participate in, that team championships, right? You don't want to burn out and get exhausted early. So whilst it's good to play in the Warmasters event and get that experience and test things out, you don't want to get to a point where, halfway through the teams event, you're just like, I'm done with 40k after playing this many games, I'm exhausted. So there's a real acceptance of and understanding behind players wanting to play a few games in the Warmasters and then drop out. Most people tend to drop out after they lose a game. We had a few players that did that on our team this year, and we also had a few players play all the way through. We had a bit of a mixed bag, and basically as captain, I'd encouraged my players to play as long as you want to, but as soon as you're feeling like you're tired, you want to put your feet up and you want to relax before the team's event, then just drop out. So I played 4 rounds and then dropped out. So I played 3 rounds on the first day, came back the second day, played 1 more game, and then decided that I was going to drop out with the rest of my team and we were going to go do some practice and some prep back at the hotel, and also put our feet up and sort of not think about 40k for a little bit so that we weren't just exhausted and burnt out going into the teams event. So that's the nature of the drop, but let's talk about who I versed, how the games went down, and a little bit more about that. Alright, so in BCP, you can find all this information, it's all public. So if you want to view my list, it's up here. We've gone through it in the previous video, but I'll just do a quick recap there. So you've got Khan the Betrayer there. We've got Jackals, 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 10 Berserkers, 5 Berserkers, Rhino, 8 bound by 3, 8 bound by 3, and then 10 Terminators, 10 Terminators, 10 Terminators. So that's the list that we're talking about. And then here are my opponents. So my first opponent was Klaus Bachmann. I can't pronounce a lot of the names of these Europeans, unfortunately. This was a 20-point win for me. And Klaus was playing Drukhari. Now, we'll go through his list here, and then I'll talk a little bit about how the game went down. So he's got a Sky Splinter Assault was his detachment. He had an Archon, he had Drazar, and he had Lilith as his 3 characters. Then he had 10 Kabalites, 5 Racks, 5 Racks, 10 Witches. So Kabalites and Witches are his big units there. Then his dedicated transports, he had a Raider, he had 3 Venoms, and then he had other data sheets. He had 2 Kronos, 1 unit of Incubi, another unit of Incubi, a unit of Mandrakes, and then 3 units of Scourges. He had 2 with Dark Lancers, and 1 with Haywire Blasters. And then he also had 3 units of 2 Talos. So a real MSU Dark Eldar list, which I was actually slightly concerned about going in. I was worried that this MSU element was going to be really hard for the Terminators to deal with, because I've got these big bricks of Terminators. He has all these little units, and he's going to be all over the board. However, the game actually was quite interesting. So he had Drazar in a unit of Incubi, he had his Archon in a unit of Incubi, and then he had Lilith in the big unit of Witches, and all of that was in transports. And basically, we were playing just a really back and forth trading element style game. I was throwing it. I think he got first. This is a couple of weeks ago, so I'm going off of memory now. But basically, I think he got first turn. He sent out some stuff, and then basically, I'd send out Jackals to respond. Then he'd send out more stuff. I'd send out 8 bound to respond. And basically, we waited until that turn 3 before I sent out my Terminators, because I knew that I was going to need the neg 1 damage to prevent his Incubi from just killing a unit of Terminators. And I also knew that the interrupt was going to be really, really powerful, because I was going to be able to, if he throws 3 or 4 units into me, he fights with 1, kills a couple Terminators, and then I interrupt and kill the rest. So I was basically biding my time, building up my CP, as we talked about in the list video, where I broke down the strategy for the list. That strategy applied here perfectly. And basically, I powered up, generated a bunch of CP, then I went out into the middle and basically tabled him in like a turn. So I was shocked at the Terminators. One of the good things about the Terminators versus 8-bound is they have guns. So instead of picking advance and charge, I would just pick +2 movement. Those Terminators then move 7 inches out from behind a ruin or whatever. They were able to shoot down range and kill, some of these small units of Kabalites or Racks or, Scourges or what have you. So I was able to jump out, kill a bunch of that stuff, and then charge into the big stuff like the Talos or the vehicles, and actually just punch them to death. And then his response was limited, because he could go all in on one, do a lot of damage, but I had the CP for Heroically Interventions, I had the CP for neg 1 damage. It made it really, really hard for him to navigate. So the main thing that I was scared about on his list was actually the Lilith and the Witch unit, because basically I asked him at the start of the game, I was like, what in your opinion is your strongest thing for killing Terminators? And he was like, the Scourges with the Haywire are 3 damage, so they're pretty good, and the Incubi do pretty good work. And he's like, but that unit with Lilith is probably the best, because it's only 1 damage, so it gets through my neg 1 damage, it's high AP, and it's a ton of attacks. So we mathed it out together and basically was like, yep, cool, if that charges, that's probably going to kill like 6 or 7 Terminators, which is a problem. I do not want that to happen. So I was basically spending the entire game navigating around that. They were inside the Raider, and they basically beelined down one side of the table, so my Terminators sort of moved up the other way, and I kept throwing Jackals out to basically make it so that he wouldn't be able to disembark and then charge the Terminators, because there was Jackals in the way. And this is another reason why Jackals are superior to Spawn, in my opinion. because I was able to basically go, cool, there's Terminators here, there's a line of Jackals. Your maximum move and disembark puts you in front of the Jackals, which means you can't charge the Terminators that are behind you, because you can't get past. I haven't left gaps big enough for your bases to fit through, so you're going to end your charge in base contact with the Jackals, kill them, but you can't touch the Terminators. So I was able to use the Jackals to basically slow down Lilith's unit to the point where Lilith came out, I think, on turn 4, and at that point it didn't really matter because I was so far ahead because I'd basically been using the Terminators to bully him off of the other objectives. This was the mission where you spawn objectives, if I remember correctly, which typically is a disadvantage for me because I don't want to be doing actions with my units because they're so big and so valuable. And he has so many disposable units, he doesn't mind doing actions and spawning objectives and whatnot. However, it worked for me in the end because I was playing cagey for those first couple of turns. I was able to spawn objectives because I didn't want to commit those Terminators to go do that damage anyway. I was happy to sit where they were. One of the things about this list that's really important to note is that when you are versing MSU, it's really important to deploy 2 units of Terminators and only have 1 in Deep Strike because he has the speed that I'm never going to be able to Deep Strike or Rapid Ingress 2 units of Terminators. He's only really going to give me 1 opportunity to do that. So I deployed 2 units, and that was really good because it meant when he did push up into the middle, I was able to send out 2 units of Terminators. That's enough shooting to kill a ton of stuff, and then also charge and pop a whole bunch of things as well. So I basically had Khan and his unit went out and they killed Incubi and Taloses, and then they were put in a position where, yeah, the Scourges could come over and shoot them, but then they would Blood Surge move in. You know, the Talos, the Kronos and whatever they could shoot, but then they Blood Surge in, so that's not good. And then if they charge that, they fight with one thing first, kill a bunch, and then I interrupt and killed. So Khan's unit was absolutely brutal in that matchup. The Terminators were absolutely fantastic. And one of the other good things about Khan's unit is that Rhino gives you another piece that's able to do objectives. So after Khan's come out and disembarked, the Rhino was able to swing around and it was able to do things like spawning objective markers, cleansing, those sorts of things. So all in all, it was an absolutely brutal match and I got that big 20-point win. Alrighty, my next matchup was into a lovely bloke named Christian. Let's have a look at his list. So he was a Tau player, and I got a 20-point win into this as well. He goes by Chessie. So he had, this was a Kayan, was the detachment that he was using. He had Shadow Sun, he had an Enforcer battle suit with the Exemplar of Kayan, he had an Ethereal, he had Crisis Fire Knife battle suits, which were the ones that have all the missile pods. Just a ton of bullets coming out of these guys. Then he had a Ghost Keel, he had 3 Hammerhead gunships, he had a unit of Kroot Carnivores, a unit of Kroot Firestalkers, 2 Krutox Riders, a Pathfinder team, 3 Piranhas, and 2 Riptide battlesuits, 2 units of stealth suits, or 3 units of stealth suits. So that was his list there. Again, I'll chuck links in the description if you want to check these lists out. Now this matchup was really, really interesting because I knew that the Ghost Keels and the Riptides have a lot of 3 damage and 4 damage weaponry, which is really good at shooting and killing Terminators. And that unit that has the Enforcer and all of those Fire Knife guys is really, really good at shooting as well because they can basically get... I can't remember exactly how it works, but they can get reroll hits and wounds, or maybe it's reroll hits and lethal hits or something like that. Either way, they put out a ton of bullets. So I was like, okay, there's a few elements in this list that I'm really worried about. But there's also a few elements in this list that I'm not particularly worried about. Like the Hammerhead gunships, for example. They're not really that good into Terminators. The all the Kroot stuff, that's all stuff that Jackals can kill. You know, I can pick them up relatively easily. And once some of these bigger elements are dealt with, Khan's unit becomes really, really powerful. Because he's got lots of like incidental shooting that Khan's unit will just pick up, no worries. So I can't remember what the mission was. I wish I could. I think it was Kill More, Purge the Foe. So it's Kill More, Hold More, which was great because basically in that game, I think I deep struck 2 units of Terminators in this one, just deployed 1 because I knew that I was going to have to try to get the drop on his crisis suits and things. Deployed everything relatively hidden. He used his Kroot and his I think it was just his crew, maybe the Pathfinders as well, to sort of scout and infiltrate up forward in an attempt to block my 8-bound. And this is one of the other reasons why 8-bound are really, really good, even in a list like this that is designed to not be aggressive in the first turn. Because I can put those 8-bound on the front line, my opponent has to do something about it, because they have to think, what if Dean does just send those in, you know? And what if those 2 units of 8-bound kill a Riptide? Or what if they kill a bunch of my trading pieces or my objective pieces, right? So as a result, he has to screen out this big thing in the first turn. And then in my scout moves, I scout back and I'm hidden, but he's now presented a unit to me on a silver platter, right? So in this one, he got the first turn. So he basically, knowing that he had no firing lines on any of my stuff, he basically just pushed a bunch of things forward to try to screen me out. And then because it was Purge the Foe, Hold More, Kill More, and I have the bottom of the turn, I was at a pretty heavy advantage, because basically in his first turn he can't kill anything because everything's hidden. Then in my first turn I drew like Area Denial and no prisoners, and then I was like, cool, Jackals go out, they kill those crew that were in the middle. That gets me Kill More, because he killed nothing in his turn. It also gets me a no prisoners. It also gets me an Area Denial. It also puts me on that central objective. It was an absolute fucking perfect case scenario right there. Then in his turn, he goes to shoot the Jackals, and I sticky the objective that they were sitting on. And he's like, oh no. So now he's like got no way of doing that. So he has to try to charge some stuff to try to get onto the objective, which he did successfully. He charged like a Piranha or something like that onto something else and was able to sort of swing around. But that then opened up a hole that I was able to rapid ingress into. Like, there was a whole bunch of different stuff happening that, you know, just did not go my opponent's way. There was one point where I had a unit of Terminators come out and he dropped that Fire Knife unit, shot into the Terminators, but because I was able to position them in cover, they actually didn't do a great deal of damage, because I had removed a lot of his trading pieces with Jackals and with 8-bound, that he wasn't able to effectively spot for himself using the Tau rules and all that sort of stuff. So he wasn't able to do that critical damage to push me over, and as a result I was sort of pushing him back into his own deployment zone. There was a few moments there that were really frustrating, where like I killed with 5 Berserkers, I charged his unit of Pathfinders, and I killed him down to 1 Pathfinder left. And then that Pathfinder in the next turn was able to go out, get Secure No Man's Land, and Cleanse, and also screen out a Terminator drop. So there was a few really interesting swings in that direction as well, where he actually got some significant results. But over the course of the game, it became very apparent that because he had so many points locked up in those hammerheads that I was not even remotely concerned about, that was really, really good for me. And basically, the fact that he wasn't really able to push me off of objectives meant that if he shot me off them, I'd just sticky them. So I ended up getting a really huge primary score here. And because he had so many pieces, I was able to get Kill More, given the bottom of the turn, more often than not. So really awesome game, a lot of fun, but another big win for me. So now I'm on 2 max wins, 2 20-point victories, going into the third round. Alright, so let's look at the third round. This one here is into Marcus Jensen, who actually ended up placing 2nd overall, so a very, very competent player, very talented man, and he was playing the best faction in Warhammer 40k, which is World Eaters. So it was an interesting sort of a mirror match here. Although his list was a lot more typical of a World Eaters list, so let's go through it together now. So he had Angron, he also had Khan the Betrayer, but in addition, he had Lord Invocatus and a Master of Executions with the Berserker's Glaive. So lots of characters. Then he had 2 units of Jackals, a unit of 5 and a unit of 10 Khorne Berserkers. He had 2 Rhinos. He had a single unit of regular 8-bound, a unit of 3 Exalted 8-bound, a unit of 6 Exalted 8-bound, and a Chaos Spawn. So a much more typical World Eaters list. And I had actually designed my list in part to beat the World Eaters mirror match. So I thought that this was a favorable matchup for me. I was wrong. No, it was basically the World Eaters matchup. When you play the mirror, anyone who's ever played it before knows that it's one of the wildest games, because if both people are taking fight on death, everything dies really fast. and it all boils down to who's luckier with those 4-ups, generally speaking. So basically, I got the first turn, so I had deployed basically a big line of jackals all the way along the center, and then 4 inches behind it, I had all of my terminators and stuff, right? And I think I just put one unit of terminators in deep strike, the rest of them on the table. And then the idea here was that even if he scout moves and goes in, he can't get past the jackals because he can't fit through the gaps. And if he hits the jackals and kills them, even if he hits them with 2 units, fights with one and kills the unit, and then goes to pile them with the next one, he won't be able to hit terminators. So I have a big line of jackals at the front, terminators, Rhino, Khan, all that sort of stuff behind. And then basically, my first turn, I just moved that whole line up into the middle, knowing that his scout moves, he's scouted to basically try to stay outside of my 8-bounds range, because 8-bound are actually really good at killing things like Exalted 8-bound because they're 3 damage weapons, on the sergeant at least. So yeah, basically I just pushed that line up into the middle. Then he hit it in a few bits and pieces, but he was basically going, he needs to stay outside of my charge range. We had this little cat and mouse thing happening. So there was a real pivotal moment where basically he sent Angron onto an objective over onto the side, and I knew that I had to kill Angron, otherwise he was just going to run around and pick up all my army, right? As anyone who's versed World Leaders knows. So I've thrown Khan's unit and a unit of 10 Terminators in to him. Fought with Khan's unit first, spent the CP for +1 to wound, and got Angron down to just below half strength. Then I fought with the Terminators, killed him, but then he's fought on death and wiped out Khan's entire unit. So now I've lost Khan's entire unit in exchange for Angron. There was also one really big fight where there was like a unit of Terminators, he threw in a unit of 6 Exalted 8-bound and a unit of 3 Exalted regular 8-bound and a unit of Jackals, and basically I put on the instead of putting on fights on death, because I knew the unit was going to die, the whole unit was going to die, but I could either fight on death and half of the unit would likely get to fight, or I could let my opponent hit me, kill half the unit, and then spend 2 command points to interrupt fighting with that half of the unit. And instead of fights on death, I'll take sustained hits, which is going to, do more damage when I do fight back. So he threw in 8-bound Jackals. He fought, killed like 4 Terminators, 5 Terminators. So then I've gone, cool, I'm going to interrupt, fought, killed a bunch of his stuff, but then his stuff fights on death and then kills the rest of the Terminators. So we basically had this one bit where everything charged in and almost everything died. The problem was, I ended up losing the entire Terminator unit, and he had like 2 guys left from the Exalted 8-bound, 1 left from the regular 8-bound, and like 4 Jackals left. And what that meant was that even though I decimated a lot of his stuff, he still had all these little pieces that were able to go around and do things like cleansing, do things like securing no man's land behind enemy lines. He gets it and he's like, yep, cool, these 8-bounders go bop and get it. So it was like, it was good in that the amount of damage dealt felt equitable, but because he had multiple units, that was a challenge. The other things that were annoying were he had that fights first Master of Executions. That was a challenge to get around. My way of approaching that was to charge Jackals into it, base contact all of the models, and then hit 8-bound from the side so that the Master of Executions couldn't fight the 8-bound. And that worked really well. I fought and I killed almost everything. The Master of Executions was left with a single wound remaining, but now he's lost all of his Berserker bodyguard, which means he's not getting fight first anymore. So I'm like, oh, he's not that big of a problem. Then we had one turn where a unit of Terminators dropped in and went to shoot, and I was like, I'm just going to shoot that Master of Executions and kill him. This was a turn when I had something like no prisoners, so I was like, I'll shoot him and kill him, then I'll charge Khan's unit, kill that, and get max no prisoners. And I shot 6 combi weapons and 2 Reaper autocannons into a Master of Executions that only had 1 wound left, and I failed to kill him. And then when I've charged Khan's unit, I've failed to kill that as well. So there was a few really disappointing swings in the game, and then Khan, of course, he goes in and just goes mental and kills a bunch of Terminators. So there were a few really disappointing swings in the game. I think my opponent played it exceptionally well, and I think this matchup highlighted to me that just how important Angron can be. Because if you're able to get Angron to pop off, you just win. It turns a hard game into a free win. And that's really, really important to be able to have that in your toolkit, whereas I didn't have that in my toolkit. So even though I think the Terminators and stuff like that were outclassing the 8-bound often, the problem was that he had that one big hyper scary, hyper fast, damage dealer that I didn't have. So as a result, he won. It was a really lovely game. He was an absolutely lovely bloke, and yeah, it was good to see the World Eaters mirror match. It's something that I actually dread playing. I hate it because it becomes so swingy. In my experience, every time I play World Eaters, I either 20-0 them or they 20-0 me, and it all boils down to the interactions with fights on deaths, and who gets the first turn or second turn. That is a really important element that goes into that game as well. But yeah, it's an absolute bloodbath. One interesting thing worth noting is that about 1 or 2 minutes into that game, I've met him, shook his hand, and then I just got this random blood nose out of nowhere, and I was just like, "Is that a fucking omen or what?" I mean, it was probably just because we were playing in this old converted Air Force hangar in the middle of European summer, and it was hot as fuck and really dry, and I think that just sort of caused a blood nose. But it just seemed like an omen that, like, I'd just played against Tau, no blood nose there. I'd just played against Drukhari, no blood nose there. But as soon as you put the two World Eaters players on the top table, for the third round, it's like the nails were biting. So it was a really funny, really good game, but a crushing loss for me. And that rounded out the first day of the Warmasters, and now we'll go into the second day and into the fourth round. Alright, so back here on BCP, and we're going to go into the last round, which was into Todor. And he was playing Space Wolves. So, Fluffy Fury Furry was his list name. Cool list name. And basically, he was running Space Wolves, and it was the Lightning Assault detachment, which is the Space Wolves detachment. So he had Bjorn the Fell-Handed, Canis Wolfborn, Logan Grimnar on a Storm Rider, then he had a Battle Leader on a Thunderwolf, another Battle Leader on a Thunderwolf, and then a Wolf Lord on a Thunderwolf. So lots of, there's like, what, 1, 2, 3, 4 characters riding wolves, plus Logan Grimnar with his wolves, and then also Bjorn the Fell-Handed, who is an absolute monster, and we'll get into him in a moment. Then other data sheets, he had a unit of 5 Fenrisian wolves, he had a Gladiator Lancer, he had an Infiltrator squad, 2 Scout squads, and then he had 3 big Thunderwolf cavalry squads. Oh no, he had two big ones and 1 small one. And then he had 3 units of Wolfen as well, 1 big one and 2 small ones. So that was his Space Wolves list. And now this list was absolutely crazy. So he had an enhancement that allows him to rapid ingress first turn, and basically he was going to put me in Wolf Jail, right? I think in this matchup, I got the first turn, but the main pivotal moments from this matchup were the Space Wolves don't really deal with 2-up armor, particularly when I turn on the neg-1 damage. He wasn't doing a massive amount of damage into me, and I was chewing through him slowly. There was a few moments. One of them was he put some stuff out into the center to hold objectives and whatnot. I then sent Berserkers out, and he shot them with like the bolt pistols off his Thunderwolves, killed a Berserker, which then allowed me to Blood Surge move into the things that he had placed on the objective, and then I was able to kill them off the objective and score the objective myself. So that was one flip, and that was just with the little 5-man Berserker unit, right? So that was getting immense value. The Jackals were also really good. Jackals were killing things like Infiltrators. The Terminators were shooting and killing the Wolfen, which was a really good way of playing around their fights on death. But the big challenge for me in this matchup was that Bjorn the Fell-Handed, because he has a 12-inch aura which is a massive area when you think about it, 12-inch aura of all stratagems that you want to use cost you an additional command point. So now my standard playbook of powering up and having enough CP that I can neg 1 damage here and interrupt over there, that doesn't work, because that's going to cost 6 command points, just to be able to pull off those 2 stratagems. So that was really hard, and he's also tough as hell. So he basically sent that guy down around one flank, so I basically just went around the other flank to try to avoid him so that I wouldn't have to deal with that stratagem problem. I sent Khan and his berserkers into him with lethal hits with +1 to wound, charged him, failed to kill him because he can Armor of Contempt and then get 2-up saves against all of those berserker attacks. So that was really disappointing, and then in return he killed a bunch of berserkers. So that was really brutal. But I eventually took him down. I eventually took Logan's unit out. I eventually took out, one of the other units that was running around and secured a small win. So this one, I think I only got a 12-8 win, so not a massive win, but a win regardless. And I think ultimately it all boiled down to the fact that those wolves only get the +1 damage on the turn that they charge. And on the turn that they charge, if I put -1 damage on, he doesn't kill me, I don't kill him, but then we go into this ongoing combat. And in the ongoing combat, I have the advantage because as I start taking casualties, I start getting +1 to hit, I start getting +1 to wound inbuilt, and I also have those high strength, high AP, high damage attacks that he doesn't have. He requires the charge. So he was able to do things like fall back and charge and stuff like that, but I was able to sort of move block him so that he couldn't do that with my pile-ins, so that he couldn't get out. There was a lot of different things that I could do there to sort of slow the Space Wolves down. And once I've taken out 1 or 2 of those big bricks of Thunderwolves, he didn't really have a lot in his lineup that could do a lot of damage to me. The wolf in themselves, they're scary, but I was like, I'm just not going to charge them, because if I charge them, they die, they fight on death, they take a bunch of me out anyway. I'm just going to shoot them with the Terminators and kill most of them, and then charge them with things like Jackals that I don't really care about. The Jackals will pick up a few here and there. So that was really effective. And in this one, the 8 bounds reroll 1 aura really came into it, because when I was charging into those Thunderwolves, having the ability to reroll some of your wound rolls was really pumping up the damage output on those units. So yeah, really, really interesting game. There was this big combat in the middle that actually got kind of interesting because he has a reactive move stratagem. So I've sent Khan's unit out going to hunt Logan Grimnar's unit, and then he reactively moves. But when he did it, he reactively moved so his unit was on either side of a wall. Because it was like a wall like this, he's reactively moved some of them onto this side, some of them onto that side. And then Khan's gone, okay, cool, I'll charge over there instead. And then Terminators have charged in. And as a result, the guys that are on this side of the wall couldn't pile in to get through the wall. And as a result, the guys on this side couldn't pile in because that would break coherency. So he had this unit that was kind of just awkwardly stuck in the middle. And I was able to basically put an entire unit of Terminators into the front of that unit. And I was able to fight with my entire unit, but he wasn't able to fight with his. And because he had characters on the inside, he couldn't just like remove casualties to prevent me from keeping that fight going. He had to keep pulling from the back, and it made for a really interesting combat in the middle. Logan Grimnar's unit is absolutely wild. It does serious damage, so don't underestimate it. And if you're a World Eaters player and you're going into Space Wolves, don't take this victory as justification to assume you're going to win yours. It was an absolutely brutal game, really, really challenging, and absolutely lovely opponent as well. So that rounded out my 4th game for the Warmasters. And at this point, I was like, cool, I've actually got some interesting data and some interesting information from participating in this. I now know that I can beat the Drukhari MSU. I was a bit worried about that going into the event. I know I can beat Tau, if provided their list doesn't have a billion 3 damage weapons. But if they bring things like hammerheads, I can definitely beat that. I can beat the Space Wolves, provided things go my way. If there's no Bjorn, it's even better. And most of them didn't have Bjorn, so I was like, so that's 3 matchups that I know I can win. The World Eaters is something that I knew I wanted to avoid anyway, but I now know that what I probably should have done in that matchup is ignored Angron, because killing Angron for no value, no return, was a problem. Whereas if I had just let Angron go, each time he charges Terminators, he kills 2 or 3. It's not that big of a deal. Maybe he kills 4, but he's not going to kill the Terminators. So I should have let Angron hit me and then responded, instead of trying to hunt Angron. Which you'd think, being a World Eaters player, I would know that. But this is one of the reasons that we participate in the Warmasters singles event, is so that we can learn this stuff, so that we don't make those mistakes when we're playing in the teams event. Because you don't want to make mistakes that are going to let your team down, whereas making the mistakes in a singles event, that's fine, who cares. But yeah, so at this point of the event, I'm like, cool, I've played plenty of games, I've got plenty of data. Everybody else, or almost everybody else in the team, had dropped out by this point. So I was like, you know what? That as captain, I should be with my team. You know, I should be helping them, talking about pairings and preparing for the event, and also, you know, just mingling with them and bonding and all the team building stuff that we were doing it while we were over there. I was like, it's more important for me to be there than to be continuing on with this Warmasters event. And I also know my own limits and know that fatigue is something that I need to manage. Fatigue can be a real problem. So I was like, you know what? I don't want to exhaust myself in going into the event. So I reached out to the TOs and I was like, hey, just letting you know that, you know, I intend to drop out from the event. And they're like, yep, totally makes sense. And then me and the boys went back to the hotel and continued on with the rest of the trip. So that sums up the Warmasters. I think I placed like 222nd out of 500. Which, given that I only played 4 out of 6, or 4 out of potentially 8 rounds, because they had the shadow round and all that sort of stuff, yeah, I'm relatively happy with that result. I only lost one game, and it was to the mirror match, and it was to the guy who came second, so I'm happy with that as well. And it was a really good opportunity to test out the 30nators list and see just how crazily powerful those Terminators can be, and really become intimately aware of the strengths and weaknesses of the list. So the main strength being that there's just these really chunky units that are really hard to kill, particularly if you play cagey and you only give your opponent a couple of turns to deal with them. If you stay hiding in your ruins and stuff like that until turn 3, you're like, cool, well now I have enough command points to fuel interrupts and sticky objectives and neg 1 damage, so it's really hard for you to get through me. And I have a 4-up invulnerable save with 10 guys that have 3 wounds each. It's really hard to chew through that. If you can play conservatively for the first few turns, just sending out Jackals, just sending out Berserkers, trading for those small pieces, and then wait until turn 3 and then send out everything, it's an absolute ripper of a list. And Warmasters outlined that in great detail. So I'm really happy with it. I really enjoyed the event, and I will definitely be going back for the Warmasters next year. And yeah, so with that being said, we're going to wrap up this video on the Warmasters, and then in the next videos we're going to be talking about the teams event itself in great detail. We'll talk about the matchups, we'll talk about the teams that we versed, the nations, all of that really cool stuff. And I look forward to updating you guys on all of that. If you're enjoying this, make sure you like, subscribe, chuck a comment in below, and if you want to learn a little bit more about Team Australia over there, head over to teamoz40k.com. and you can find out a whole bunch more information there. As well as, if you want to get up to date with our antics while we were over there, check out the Risky Rollers YouTube channel. They did some really interesting vlog content while we were over there, which is always good for a laugh. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.
Look for the Blood God.